This is a fantasy.
It's always exciting when we get to see a new IP in the JRPG space, and when you get something new from the people behind the Persona series, you tend to notice. So with all of the hype around their new game, Metaphor ReFantazio, I wanted to take the time to break down everything we know so far about the game's story and characters. Let's get into it. In 2016, a division within Atlus was set up to be led by the former director of the Persona games, Katsura Hishino. The development team was set up in order to be separate from Atlus's other two studios, which largely focus on Shin Megami Tensei and the Persona games. This new dev team would focus on the new IP for Atlus, with a focus on fantasy. The project that would ultimately become Metaphor ReFantazio was named Project ReFantasy. At the time, the team only knew that they wanted to create a fantasy RPG in their own style, with a specifically Atlus flavour. As you can see, in the original announcements, they were going for a more traditional Western medieval aesthetic, which is common among fantasy RPGs. But from more recent developer videos, Hishino and others have said that it ultimately didn't feel right and didn't feel very Atlus, so they decided to heavily put their own spin on what a fantasy world would look like if it was built up from the ground in the Atlus style. Even when talking about the main protagonist's clothing, the game's character designer Shigenori Soejima even admitted that given the game's focus on travelling through dusty and dirty environments, that it doesn't make much sense for the main protagonist to be wearing white. However, he laughs it off and admits that he just wanted the character to be fashionable, which honestly, I'm kind of on board with. Ultimately, I'm glad that they've put their own spin on the genre, because they've put together a fantasy RPG game that doesn't look like any I've encountered before, which is really refreshing. While there isn't a huge amount of information out there at the moment, there is enough to give us the broad strokes of what the game's overall plot will involve. The game takes place in a fantasy world in a country where the king has just died. The new king will be chosen by the people in what's called the Tournament for the Throne. Details aren't super clear at the moment on what the tournament will look like exactly, but what we do know is that it will involve some sort of popularity contest where the protagonist will need to travel across the country to win people over. And the main way that they seem to be doing their travelling is in something called a gauntlet runner, which is a bizarre vehicle that looks a bit like a boat with legs. Interestingly enough, though, in Japan, the name for the vehicle is actually translated as propaganda car, which actually I think better suits what the game is actually trying to go for. Many of the trailers and creative videos that have come out so far introduce the idea of different tribes within the country. The main character even mentions that a book that he appears to be reading tells of a world that is somewhat of a utopia when all of the tribes are united. And so I think a lot of this game is going to be about uniting tribes, becoming popular with them, and becoming king that way. You get a sense of how this is going to be achieved when you take a look at the party screen that's been shown. Each of the characters in the party looks to be from a different race to the protagonist, and from different tribes. In fact, in one of the videos that's been released, they go through each of the main characters and show that they are from different tribes, and having party members from different tribes is likely going to help win the tribes over within the Tournament for the Throne. There's a lot of parallels with the way that this works with how politicians in our own world tour around a country to gain support of voters from different regions. Politicians often find it more difficult in some areas to gain support than others, and I wonder if that's going to play out in a similar way in Metaphor. In fact, there's a bit of information in one of the dev team videos that shows some of the information on the protagonist and the tribe he's from being looked down on. I think that this is going to make gaining popularity in certain scenarios pretty difficult, and it'll be our job to overcome this difficulty. We're pretty limited on details about the main characters. However, in the creator's voice trailer, we're given a little bit of a glimpse into their names and a little bit of information about them as well. The main characters have the ability to transform into something called archetypes, which is very similar to a persona, for example, but rather than summoning it, the character actually transforms into the archetype. Archetypes are obviously heavily involved in the battle mechanics, which I'll cover in another video. So far we've been introduced to 5 main characters, starting with the protagonist, who's a boy from the Elder tribe, which is branded as tainted because people believe that they inherit dangerous and taboo magic. The text also mentions that he's been friends with the prince since childhood. I'm not 100% sure who the prince is, but I think it could possibly be this guy. The next character that we're shown is Stroll, potentially named after a Formula 1 driver given another character's name. We're told that Stroll is a young man of the Claymore tribe, and that he's smart, likeable, and respects justice. He's from a noble family and he joins commoners as a volunteer soldier. Next, there's Hulkenberg, which is why I thought that the other character was from Formula 1 and that's why they're going with those kind of names. I could be totally wrong about that, by the way. But Hulkenberg is a knight of the Roussant tribe. She's skilled with a sword and formerly a part of the royal guard that served by the prince's side. Then there's Heisme, who seems to be some kind of bat race character. The text in the creator's voice trailer says that he's a former knight of the Ugif tribe and has the ability to detect anomalies that others can't perceive. And finally there's Gallica. She seems to be somewhat of a guide or navigator who helps the protagonist. As a fairy, she has great knowledge of magic and has the ability to perceive the enemy's power, so some sort of scan ability. Given that we don't know much about the main characters just yet, I really hope that they get fleshed out as we play through the game, as characters with depth and growth is one of the things that I enjoy most about normal JRPGs. And that pretty much wraps up all the information that we've found out so far. I absolutely love the style of the Persona games, and seeing that done within a fantasy setting is just a dream come true. But what do you think? Is there enough meat on the bones of what we've seen so far to get you hooked, or are you eagerly waiting for more information to come out? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos on Metaphor and other RPGs. In the meantime, take care and I'll see you later.